Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about red flags. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, would you say that would saying that they haven't faced a specific situation asked in the behavioral interview be a red flag? So if I'm reading the question right, what you're saying is if I ask you about a specific situation in an interview and you say that you haven't been part of something like that, is that a red flag? Well, this is very much dependent on the question that I might ask you. So an example would be if I ask a front-end developer, do you know about behavioral-driven development, for example, or have you done any stuff like that? I don't really expect them usually to know about that stuff because it depends on the profile, of course, a little bit. But usually, I don't expect them to do that because most companies and most front-end developers don't really deal with that sort of stuff. They might have a QA team or someone else who's doing it for them, and some of them have like experiences with Cypress or Playwright or something like that a little bit, right? Nothing like really serious. And it's the same thing with the backend developers on this topic because BDD is not something that I would expect everybody to know about, even though I have experiences with it and I know people who do. So that's a very benign thing for you to not really know all that much about, or other things like security or things that I know is like it's a treat if someone knows about it, but it's not something that you really expect someone to know. But on the other hand, if I ask them like if I ask a backend developer what their experiences are with, I don't know, deploying software, for example, or checking logs, or being on call or something like that, and they say that they have no experience doing that, then all of a sudden it becomes more serious because this is something that you might expect from someone who is working at the larger scale companies and maybe involved in DevOps related things and so forth and so forth. And I mean, if you can go even further and you say, okay, what is your experience with testing, for example, and they say that they don't usually do that, that is a red flag. So it really comes down to the nature and like the how core do you consider the situation that you're asking about. It's similar to if you talk about if in this case you're talking about the behavioral traits, like if you ask people, if you ask a tech lead, for example, like how do you coach your software developers, and this person doesn't really do that, doesn't really know, and you can really hear that they've never coached anybody in their life. They don't have a pedagogical bone in their body or so forth. They don't really have any clue of what you're talking about, or they don't really have a clue of how to like run an efficient team or a pipeline or something like that. These are red flags because the role that they are taking on is very much tied to a certain set of experiences, depending now, of course, where they've been doing this. Because I mean, I've met tech leads or team leads who are like juniors, like it's a joke. The fact that they put uh, which is the problem, right? They're a team lead, they're a tech lead in a company with like two other juniors or something like that, where like being a tech lead in that environment is literally, more commands to start up the server than the other guys or girls. It's not really the same sort of thing as you would do at a more in a more advanced situation. And this is the expectation management that we have, where and touches on the thing that this term that I've used for you guys a few times, which is core skills. What is considered core skills? Well, as a junior, it might be all coding related. So if I ask you questions related to like different coding experiences, you don't really know any of that stuff, that's a red flag. And the more advanced the role and the higher up you get, and depending on the company as well, depending on what sort of criteria they have, it becomes a wider net that they throw out. And in situations where, for example, you, as I was saying, you're hiring leadership or tech people like that, then you have in some cases dedicated interviews just to leadership and people management and things like that. It's not just all tech. And that's the tricky part about this, to answer this question, because it, as I said, it really depends on what experiences have you had, and this isn't something you can really do much about. Which is, as I've said to you, a few who have reached out to me on the comment section and so forth, and being worried about being too slow or being junior or being this or that or not being ready. And I go, the reality is, guys, that you're not always going to be a perfect fit for every situation. It's not always going to be your fault. There are situations where you will simply not have had the sort of experiences necessary to have this job. And in some cases, the people who are doing the interview will have their own biases or like their idea of how one should do something or another. And you can't really do much about that because it's their idea of what it means to fulfill whatever role they have in the company that determines what they consider to be a red flag. Some stuff is as I said, like the unit testing or like these basic things. These might be red flags for most companies, but some of it is so advanced that that you might only, you might trip up on something that you don't really understand because maybe you haven't had those experiences, or maybe this specific interviewer or this specific company has a fairly specific idea of what the red flag test is for the role, like for the profile that they're interviewing for. So what I want you to take away from this is that yes, you can absolutely trip up and be lacking experiences in key areas is definitely a red flag. It's the thing that most interviewers who know what they're doing are looking for, because when you work in software development, there are things that are, as I said, maybe a treat, like it's not a big deal if you haven't done A, B, or C. But in some key areas, it's like critical that, or most people consider that it's critical that you've had these sorts of experience. If you haven't had those experiences, it is a testament to, because this is the thing that determines seniority. Basically, I've said this to you guys before. A senior is not necessarily better at writing an algorithm than a mid-level, but a senior software developer should have experiences and know how to deal with a larger range of situations than what a mid-level has. You have a different level of maturity. It's very similar to, as I've said before, guys, a teenager and someone who is in their 40s. You have different perspectives on things, and you deal with situations and think differently, and it's measurable, or like it's tangible when you talk to people of different maturity levels. I'm not saying that, I mean, I know 20-year-olds that are more mature than some 40-year-olds, but I hope that you sort of understand my point. You have certain expectations on people's experiences, because some of this stuff is common to everybody. Like that's the case, right? If you have the same sort of roles, then you usually have at least some overlap with the things that you have been doing, that other people will have done the same sort of thing, right? And these are the touch points that you have when you do an interview. This is how you figure out what seniority level does this person have, how do they, like, what type of living have they been doing. And so if you talk to someone who is supposed to be your new chief of DevOps or something like that, but they've never used they've never run anything that is more sophisticated than a sleepy little server in this tiny little startup, and now they're going to take on like the leadership role, for example, for a gigantic multi-billion corporation, you're going to notice that they don't really have the experiences necessary. They might not be able to deal with that situation. And so this is what you just have to accept, guys. Sometimes you're not going to have the profile that someone's looking for. And you can't do much more here than try to do as much living as possible and expose yourself to as many different types of situations as possible, and do as best as you can. Because you can't prep for this. It's a life experience, basically. Have a great day.